You still look like a toy. You've got to fix that. Hi, and welcome to the latest volume of Ask a Brit. This is volume 58, as you can tell by the number in the title. It's a big giveaway. And another giveaway is that this particular episode is about the US immigration process. And that's something, of course, that I know a little bit about. But I'm not the all-seeing purveyor of immigration expertise, as it were. I mean, I get questions quite a lot, I think, from you fine folks about certain tenets of the immigration process. I know a very specific portion of it, and that happens to be kind of the marriage portion of it and how you acquire your green card through that. And most of my answers today may have a sort of bias toward that particular part of the immigration process. But we will look at some other sort of specific things that have come up on this as well. Before we get underway here, I just want to let you know, or rather bring to your attention, something that's quite important, I think, when thinking about the immigration process. And if you are somebody who's very particularly looking to move to the United States, but you're not really sure if you are a candidate for it, if you are eligible for it, the best place to go is to the USCIS website, and they have an Explore My Options page, and I will link to that below. And what that allows you to do is basically take you through a bunch of scenarios to see if you are eligible, and if you are eligible, what you need to do to emigrate here, and the forms that you would need to fill out in order to make that move. It's a very important tool, I think, and it tells you far more than I could. I wouldn't come to me for this advice, generally speaking, but like I said, I do want to talk about some of the things that I experienced moving here. So hopefully that can be of some use. And without further ado, we are going to get underway with questions surrounding US residency. The first question today comes from Instagram stories, and of course, anybody that's new to this format, we put out the topic for each Ask a Brit episode across social media, but before we do that, we actually put it out on Patreon. We'll be getting to a few of the questions that came from our patrons later on, but if you would like your question to be guaranteed to be answered here on Ask a Brit, then I would highly recommend becoming one of our patrons, because one of the quirks is that we do prioritize the questions that we get through on there. Like I said, we will get to some of those questions, or all of those questions that came from Patreon here in just a moment. But the first one, as I said, today comes from Instagram. This is from the user on Instagram, 31BKW2. That's a mouthful, or a postcode, can't decide which. And they ask, is the process the same for everybody, or does it depend? Well, it absolutely depends, of course. I mean, I came here, as I said, through marriage, and that is something that quite a lot of expats moving here do, and it is, in fact, I think, one of the leading reasons that immigrants move to the United States. It is to marry usually a US citizen so that they can be here, and that is exactly what I did. But there are other reasons that you might move here. One of the other leading reasons, of course, is that people move here to work. They're often sponsored perhaps by a company, and they might move here on a temporary visa to do that. They may move here on a more long-term visa to do that, by which time it wouldn't so much be a visa, but would become a permanent resident card like the one I have, but just for a different reason. And then you've got things like refugee status, asylum status. I believe there's even sort of residency for widows of US citizens, and you can get residency and citizenship, I should say, for all manner of different things. And once again, back at the USCIS website, you can look at all of those and all of those scenarios if you happen to fit into those categories and follow through each of the steps. So yes, to answer your question in a nutshell, 31BKW2, it is by no means the same for everybody, and that's why I couldn't just sort of answer blanketly a question about immigration in most cases, because most cases are quite unique and quite specific. So the next question today comes from Jamie. This is on Facebook, and Jamie asks, I think specifically of my scenario, how much did it cost? How long did it take? And were there any hiccups along the way? So the cost for me, applying for what is known, I think, sort of more broadly as a green card, but is actually known by its name, permanent resident card. The cost for that just alone, and to this very day, it seems, is about $1,140. As part of that, you also have to pay for a sort of biometric services fee. And that is where they take your thumbprint. I think I even had retina scans or something along those lines. It's been so long now that I can't quite recall. But you have to pay a fee for them to do that, and then and that's all part of the process. And then once they've done that, they go through all of the other stuff that you've sent them, which we'll talk about here a little bit in just a moment. My cat's decided to enter the picture. And then once you've made those payments and you've sent away all the necessary forms, etc., then of course you go through the waiting period where they'll either deny or hopefully approve your bid for residency. So yes, there is a cost involved, and I think often people aren't aware of that. I think it was my assumption actually before I moved to the US that once you marry a US citizen, then you're guaranteed the right for free to move here, and that there would be some paperwork. But no, more than just paperwork of the green variety. Although of course we mostly use direct deposit now, so that doesn't make much sense. As part of Jamie's question, they also ask, do you think your choice made the immigration process faster than it might have had you chosen a different way to immigrate? And there is an argument for saying yes to that, because USCIS actually does prioritize those applications that come through in cases where somebody has married a United States citizen. It is something that is top of the list for them when making approvals. So it may have, but I haven't been down the other routes, obviously, and I perhaps never will. There shouldn't really ever be a reason for me to have to do this. Cat's walking all over me, nothing else new there. Is back. Just sit down, you little... Now, when I say easier and quicker, then you're still looking at a 9-month waiting period from the point of application to actually being approved. And in fact, sort of tied to that question, Melissa on Facebook asks, is it better to be married before you apply for the marriage visa, or should you make use of the fiancé visa first? Say, is being married already, which was the case for us. I was married when I moved here, and then we started applying. I think that the process was fairly smooth. I will say that. I can't speak to the sort of fiancé visa version of it. If anything, I would say that it's possibly slightly harder to do the fiancé visa first and then do the marriage visa once you're married, because it's just double the work, isn't it? It's more paperwork that you have to go through in order to do that.
You get the fiancé visa so that your fiancé can come over and then wed you, because you've already planned it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can actually work once you've gotten the spouse visa immediately. At least that's the way that I remember.
Oh, sure. That could definitely be. I'd have to look more into it, actually, Melissa, but that could definitely be one of the benefits of doing the fiancé visa first, is that it might afford you certain rights, such as being able to work and things like that. But again, I'll take a look at that, and I'll make maybe a comment below if that is untrue or if it is true, and I'll try to confirm it. Another question that Melissa has here, though, and this is to do with that final meeting that you have with the Department of Homeland Security. She asks, in that meeting, do they really take each of you into different rooms and then ask you questions like what type of shampoo does the other use? That was not my experience. In fact, my experience was we were in the same room at the same time, and honestly, it was a fairly straightforward process. That was the least cumbersome or scary part of the entire application process, I thought. Now, I may have got somewhat fortunate. I have heard horror stories in which people are severely grilled on specific aspects of the relationship and their reason for moving to the United States. I must have been lucky that day and got a very nice human being. They were nice. But the next question comes from Ian, and this is on YouTube, and Ian asks, was there anything surprisingly easy or surprisingly hard about the process? I will say, and again, to reiterate, I would say that the surprisingly easy thing was the sit-down interview at the very end of the process before I was, ultimately given the right to live and work here. That was far easier than I was expecting it to be. The things that were hardest, outside of the cost of paying for residency, I think was just the application itself. It's very cumbersome. You have to go through multiple forms that you have to fill out, send back. But that's not the only thing. You have to have multiple affidavits completed by presumably members of your family. And those have to be signed by a notary public. So you have to go through that process as well. And then you have to send them off to the relevant place. On top of that, you have to provide things like bills to say that, yes, we've lived together for this amount of time. And you have to also provide, if you can, photographs of you having a good time, not like that. You have to show them that you are indeed a couple, that this isn't just a green card marriage, as it were, that you are serious about living together and that this is a long-term thing. So in all, I would say the most surprisingly difficult part was the application process. And like I said, it can take 9 to 15 months for that to be resolved. So, yeah, that's surprising. The money is surprising. And that is, the coffee's nice. I'm going to have coffee.
I found having to do everything by mail surprising.
Yeah, that was certainly the case when we moved here. Now, when I was doing a bit of research for this very episode, I did notice that it looks like you can carry out most of your application online nowadays, I think, but I haven't been through it to test that. So again, I might leave a comment below to see just how thorough that is and let you know how thorough that potentially is, because that would certainly be an improvement on our situation, so long as the online application system works. But our next question, as promised, comes from one of our patrons on Patreon. This is Edward, and Edward asks, is it necessary to give up your British citizenship as part of the process? Certainly not for applying for residency, as I did. I am still a British citizen. I am not a US citizen yet. But even if I were to become a US citizen, it is very much the case that dual citizenship is allowed here. So I would still be able to keep my British citizenship. Yes, in theory, it is indeed possible. And our final question around residency here today. This is a very specific question. It comes from Jonathan on Facebook. And Jonathan says, I'm currently applying for academic teaching positions in the US. My concern is that I don't only have to be the best candidate, but the best by far for a university to sponsor my visa. Would it potentially be better to come out to the US with a shitty job, his words, not mine, and pay for the visa myself and apply from there? So this is one of those specific questions that I alluded to at the top of the show, to which I don't have a direct answer. I can't say necessarily either way, whether you should move here and get a job that is outside of the realm of academia and then try to work your way in, or if it is best just to try to be the very best academically as you can and hope you get that gig. It does sound like a hard road, I have to say, trying to get sponsorship through the university in order to move here. Tara, you've worked in teaching at least. What would you yell across the room about that?
It's really unlikely that unless you have a very specific goal in mind and that university matches your goal, that they're going to be interested in bringing you over via sponsorship. That's my thought, having worked with British teachers and also, again, having worked in academia myself.
But a word quickly on sort of the British teachers that she worked with. I mean, Tara worked at an international school and there were lots of British nationals coming over and getting those teaching positions. There are specific situations in which that's going to be possible. And I know this portion doesn't really answer your question, Jonathan, but certainly if you are thinking of entering teaching in the United States, There may be some options if you're looking at bigger cities that have the likes of international schools that we have here in Chicago. I understand you have them in New York, Washington, D.C., and other places like that. Perhaps the answer may lie on USCIS's website. So once again, go through those steps on the website to see if you can get any answers there. But a lot of these answers are going to be with the academic institution in question rather than USCIS, I would imagine. And that then brings us on then to something else that, through experience anyway, I can't answer too much about, but I can in terms of the knowledge that I've acquired, and that's citizenship itself. Okay, so the first question today is an interesting one. This comes from Patreon, and it's from Tara. Not this Tara, Tara Joe from Patreon. And Tara Joe asks, how long did it take you personally to become a citizen? Now, I'm glad you've asked that, Tara Joe, because, I think that it's important for me to sort of draw that line between residency and citizenship. I'm not a US citizen, as I've said, yet. I am just a permanent resident. But in a theoretical world, to answer that question, it would have, in fact, only taken me about 3 years. If you marry a US citizen, then you can actually apply for citizenship after 3 years, so long as you've shown yourself to have lived in the United States during that time. So, by that reckoning, in theory, I could have applied for citizenship as early as 2012. But another question around citizenship, and this comes again from Facebook. This is from Nancy on Facebook, who says, you've toyed around with the thought of dual citizenship. It's true, I've talked about this before. And have you made any decisions yet? And I haven't yet. I think at first, and this was a belief for a long time until I did more research into this, I was under the belief, the inaccurate belief, that if I became a US citizen, I would have to relinquish my British citizenship. That's not true. You can be, as I said, dual citizen. So that was honestly the naive reason as to why I didn't originally apply for citizenship. And then a number of other things just sort of came up over the years. The cost of applying for citizenship, having already applied for residency, sort of put me off, especially when our income was not quite as good as it is now. So money was a factor. And then sort of relevance and importance. What is the reason that I would get citizenship? Well, of course, it does afford you the right to vote, and that would be quite a strong motivation. But on the other side of the coin, it does mean I can no longer get out of jury duty if I were to become a citizen. So there are small downsides like that. Although part of me has always thought that it might be quite interesting to do jury duty, because I'd have no other opportunity, I think, to pass judgment on a criminal. Maybe I won't put it off for much longer. It is something that is definitely in my thoughts quite regularly, especially as I do this channel. And speaking of going for citizenship, a great question here from Jeff on Patreon. Jeff asks, in your opinion, how valuable is the US citizenship test? And this is a test I took back on YouTube, back in Vlogmas, where I tested myself. Would I be able to pass a US citizenship test? Here's a practice version of it. And I did okay. I think I got 3 questions wrong or something like that, but I did ultimately pass the test. And Jeff asks, taking this test, how valuable is it in determining whether someone should be a citizen? What would you change about it, and what would you leave alone? So I think it's probably a pretty good sort of marker that I would be at least able to pass that written test. So it gives you that confidence that you'd be able to do at least that portion of it. And as far as I can tell, the test that I took is quite in line with the types of tests you would be asked to take on the road to citizenship. So I think in that sense it would fill me with confidence. What would I change about it? Not sure, really. I suppose a lot of the questions were sort of historically slanted, which it kind of makes sense. You want to be able to know a bit about the country's history. I wonder if it might have been useful to have more questions about the present day, and specifically about how the United States works politically. There were quite a few questions like that, but it just sort of seemed like if I took a general history quiz, I might well pass this. So maybe I would find a greater balance in that area. Okay, and the next question comes from Twitter. This is definitely the name of the week. It comes from Gift Horse Dentist, and Gift Horse Dentist asks, if you become a US citizen and have dual citizenship, do you have to pay taxes to the UK? UK for your US earnings? Well, I should preface this answer by saying that I'm by no means a tax expert, and if you are seeking to move here and get dual citizenship and you want to know the ins and outs of this, I would definitely seek tax expert advice. I can't really offer that, but I did do a little research into this. I couldn't find anything that said that I would have to pay taxes to the UK for the US earnings. There is something where, if I'm living in the UK but I'm a US citizen, then I still have to submit a tax return to the IRS. It was very difficult for me to fathom whether my earnings should be taxed back to the UK. It didn't seem so, though it does appear, though, that there are certain scenarios that you have to be aware of, very aware of, if you are to take dual citizenship, that the IRS and the equivalent back in the UK, the Inland Revenue, would take into account. But again, I'm no expert on this. I did find what seemed to be quite a useful article around taxation as a dual citizen. The UK and US actually have a tax treaty that goes back to 2001, and this article, which I'll again link to below, covers a lot of the scenarios in that, and hopefully that will help to answer your question. Okay, and the final two questions. A question here that's very sort of time dependent here. This comes from Wyatt. You couldn't get a more American sounding name if you tried, on YouTube, and Wyatt asks, what did 21 Savage do wrong? And for those of you not in the know, 21 Savage is a hip-hop artist from Georgia, or so it seemed. But it turns out that Mr. Savage, having moved here and gained a temporary visa in 2005 at the age of 12, didn't seem like, I don't know if his parents were involved here, but that temporary visa expired in 2006. Now, all of this time, it seems to be, the accusation seems to be that he's made the claim that he was born and raised in Georgia, but his birth certificate, which was unearthed, seems to suggest otherwise. He was born, in fact, in London in the early 90s, and so now he's in pretty big trouble, pretty hot water with US immigration, and rightly so. I think, as somebody who moved here legally and has stayed here legally, I advise anybody who's trying to move here not to move here illegally. I have some sympathy with the reasons as to why some may, if they are from a war-torn country, or if they are facing some kind of violence in their homeland and they just want a freer life, but they can't afford to move here legally. That said, in his case, he outstayed his visa. There are many, many cases. The majority of cases of illegal immigrants actually in this country is that very thing, of people outstaying their visa and then not renewing, and there are all manner of reasons as to why that might be. Sometimes it could just be laziness, which is sad in itself. I've encountered one or two where that has been the case. A lot of the time it could be down to cost. Like I say, the cost is quite high. My real thought on it is, this is somebody who was a successful artist. You would imagine that he could probably afford those costs. Don't know about other people, can't speak to individual cases, wouldn't want to, but that is definitely something I would say. But if you want more information on that, and if you are in a situation where you are here and you have overstayed the terms of your visa limit, or I should say your green card, or whatever the form is, or the card is that you're using to stay here, and you fear that you can't afford it, or you're procrastinating, you're putting it off. I know that people do this. Inform yourself. I think remain informed. Go to the USCIS website and just work out what it is you have to do ahead of time. I know that I have to renew in 2022, so I will be going there ahead of time to know exactly what it is I have to do so that I am ready for that. And the final question today, this comes from Will on Patreon, and Will asks, which is easier, becoming an American or becoming a Brit? And the way that's worded, Will, I'm guessing you mean a citizen, because of course to become an American you have to become a citizen. I'm not an American, I'm still a Brit. Can't really answer that from a citizenship point of view necessarily. I think by the looks of it, it seems that both are sort of similarly weighted in many ways. Like I said, for me though, if I'm married to a US citizen, it takes only 3 years before I can apply for that. But in terms of residency, I would say marginally, applying for residency is marginally easier in the United States, because in the UK, if Tara were to apply over there, we have to meet a wage threshold or a salary threshold of a minimum of £18,000 between us. And, you know, there would have been times in our life where that would have been kind of tricky, actually, I think. And especially when you consider that if we're moving over there together, but Tara can't work immediately. And I think that given that the minimum wage in the UK is sort of £7 and so many pence, you know, not everyone gets up to that salary. So it isn't necessarily the easiest amount to reach, especially when it is just one of you that will be earning initially. So, yeah, I would say that from an immigration standpoint, looking at the numbers anyway, moving to the US is probably marginally easier. And so that is it for this volume of Ask a Brit. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. As ever, we took questions first on Patreon. We allowed people on Patreon to ask us their questions a week ahead of time. And that's one of the perks you get for becoming a patron of ours on Patreon. And if you would be interested in doing so, you can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. But those of you who are willing to wait, those questions are still posted across social media. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and we also post it right here on YouTube in the community section. But, you know, I hope this was an informative episode of Ask a Brit. Until next time, have a wonderful week and say hello on social media and in the comments. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of Ask a Brit. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you'd like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.